Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 80th Farm Animal Day today. It's really great to have you here joining this session, and I'm sure you will learn a lot from our privileged speakers. We have Sarita today, acting as our moderator, and we have our beloved speakers as well. And I will leave it with our moderator to introduce the session and our speaker. The ground is yours, Sarita.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. And thank you for taking time out on your weekday, your work days. I'm sure more people will join in at the time. So the session is on bolster your strategy with One Health intersectionality. One Health, how to utilize intersectionality in your strategy in movement building tools. So our speakers will be giving us diverse views, and from their experience and their knowledge, they'll be taking on how to effectively highlight these issues that are intersecting between different different sectors, and how to combine One Health strategy and bring forth work for farm animals in a better way. On the panel, we have Harsha Doria and we have Pavitra Krishnan. Welcome to both of you. A bit about our speakers. Harsha Doria is Senior Campaign Officer for Animals in Farming at World Animal Protection's India office. She's been passionately working for conservation and protection of animals in all possible manner. In 2018, she joined World Animal Protection, where she works with government and public institutions and various animal organizations for the welfare of farm animals. At present, she is handling the work related to antimicrobial resistance and spreading awareness about better food choices. Harsha doesn't just work in her work time, she also writes a lot of poetry and stories on various issues, social causes, and you can read them on Down to Her. She also has her own blog. Please to look for her. And we have Pavitra here. Pavitra Krishnan is passionate about making the world a just and equitable place for all living beings and has experience of working in both animals and human rights space. In past, she has worked in farm animal welfare advocacy and policy regulation programs with FIAPO, and has also worked on livelihood enhancement projects for smallholder farmers in India with Technosar. Currently, Pavitra is leading the Global South program at 50 by 40, which is a coalition of organizations dedicated to cutting the global production and consumption of animal products by 50% by 2040. And thank you, both of you, for coming towards this session and taking your time out and enlightening us. So over to you, Pavitra.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarita, for the introduction. Do I have, okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, I hope my screen is visible to everyone. So hi, everyone. A very good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I hope you're all doing well. And it is my honor to be here with you today. And I thank the teams from Asia for Animals for organizing this event and for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm also thrilled to see that we have so many people participating and attending the event, which of course is a reflection of how strongly the animal rights movement is growing with each passing year. So without further ado, let me begin my presentation. So just to give you a quick overview of the things that we'll cover under this presentation, I'll be speaking a little bit about the problem of industrial animal agriculture and the overlapping issues which occur because of it, and why there is a need, an urgent need, to shift from the way that we currently operate. And then I will touch upon the concept of One Health and integrating it with the animal rights movement. And finally, what the solution can possibly look like. So problems with factory farming, of course, this is something that most of us working in this space are aware of. The sector is not just harmful for the environment, but it's also largely responsible for the degrading public health, human rights violations, and definitely not the least animal rights violations. So I'll just quickly touch upon each of them. Now, impact of animal agriculture on the environment. Raising livestock generates about 14.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, which of course is a very conservative figure, and the actual impact is a lot higher when we take into account the water contamination, soil degradation, and biodiversity loss, which is caused due to factory farming. We also have about 92% of fresh water, which is used for farming, mainly dominated by livestock rearing and manufacturing of animal products. And of course, conversion of forests into agricultural land and livestock ranches is one of the major causes of deforestation. And animal agriculture is actually responsible for 91% of Amazon destruction. So one might intuitively think that a lot of money does come in to mitigate it into this space, mitigate climate change. But despite the staggering figures and even the growing evidence on the impact of animal agriculture in aggravating climate change, less than 1% of the money which is actually spent to mitigate climate change goes into reducing the impact caused by factory farming, which is obviously highly disproportionate considering the potential that the space holds. Next, coming to human and animal rights violations. Of course, when we speak of factory farming, the first thing that we think of are the animals. Factory farming accounts for the largest percentage of all animals slaughtered, but it's also common practice for these farms to hire either underage workers or illegal immigrants, and which, I mean, the basic reason is that they can get away with paying lower wages or pay no insurance, which means that if a worker does get injured on a farm, it's unlikely that they will go out to seek any medical attention, and it'll mostly go unreported. Of course, I am not even putting into consideration the mental, mental health effects of working in the factory farms. These issues are highly aggravated when we come to countries in the global south. There is high unemployment rates clubbed with weak labor laws or sometimes no labor laws, and widespread poverty in most of these countries from the global south, which leads to exploitation of the workers and workers who work to produce animal-derived products. They are often overworked, underpaid, and forced to operate in unbearable working conditions, which leads to major health consequences. Coming to health, of course, the topic at hand, according to a recent Lancet report, 1 in 5 deaths are diet related, and it specifically mentions that such diets are ones which are low in vegetables and whole grains and high in red meat and processed meat consumption. So there's obviously a very huge impact of widespread factory farming when we speak about it from a consumption standpoint. Then obviously we have AMR, which I'll actually leave for Harsha to cover in her presentation. I mean, we have heard about antimicrobial resistance, and it is often referred to as an unseen crisis. And already we have over 7 lakh people dying of AMR every year, and this is projected to increase to 10 million by the year 2050. And of course, apart from the zoonotic diseases and the effects of AMR bacteria, we also have respiratory disorders arising due to factory farming. So what is One Health? Shifting a little to the topic at hand, One Health and why it's important to include the concept, especially when we are talking about animal agriculture. The concept of One Health is obviously not something new. It is an idea that has been known for more than a century, and human health and animal health and the interdependence between the two, and how they are bound to the health of the ecosystem in which they exist. But why is there an urgency now more than ever to talk about One Health? With the growing, pandemics over the past few years, you cannot, of course, deny the linkage between animal agriculture and the pandemics. And I don't think we can talk about animal agriculture and its impact on health without the mention of the recent coronavirus and, of course, the various pandemic outbreaks which took place before it. COVID-19 has hugely impacted our lives and changed the way we live, perhaps forever. And while, of course, the massive loss of lives and livelihoods due to the pandemic need to be acknowledged, it is also important to look at the root causes of the pandemic in order to minimize the risk of potentially far more damaging outbreaks in the future. Apart from that, you have 75% of emerging infectious diseases in humans now are zoonotic in nature. And there is mounting evidence which suggests that increase in zoonotic events is, of course, directly linked to the increasing interactions between humans and animals, particularly in terms of food sourcing, making it critical to highlight how our current industrial agricultural model is absolutely not sustainable and is also a serious threat that poses, it's a serious threat to both individual and global health. So how can this concept of One Health be envisaged and implemented as a collaborative global approach? It can be seen, One Health can be seen as an example of collective impact, which the concept which I'll discuss in the coming few slides. But according to WHO, One Health is an approach to design and implement programs, policies, and legislations in which multiple sectors communicate and work together to achieve better public health outcomes. So we cannot work in isolation and in silos anymore. The image that you see on this slide on the left-hand side is representative of how our current structure works. We are working, a lot of organizations, a lot of NGOs are working towards animal welfare, but with different approaches. Some are working from say, a climate change perspective, some are working from a health perspective, some are working, some are working to convert the current school menus into plant-based ones, etc. But even with this, most of us are working in silos and in isolation from each other, which often leads to duplication of efforts as well as resources. And there's an urgent need to take a more holistic and intersectional approach to ensure that the movement grows stronger and at a much faster pace. So what is collective impact? They say if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go together, if you want to go far, go together. And that is exactly what collective impact is, which is represented by the image on the right. The theory was first articulated in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And it basically is the commitment of a group of actors from different sectors to work towards a common agenda for solving a specific social issue. And this is achieved using some form of structured collaboration. Now, this is especially important when we speak of the animal rights movement, because here we're not just dealing with individual eating habits or attitudes regarding meat consumption, which in itself we'll all agree is a complex problem, but we're also dealing with structural and policy level issues with regard to factory farming. So what we need is to move from a more individual action, which results in isolated impact, to collaborative action, which will result in collective impact. So to the image, you can maybe think for your own organizations as to where individual NGOs fall when we speak of collective action. Are you working on specific issues in isolation? And then you have coordinated action where a group of actors or group of NGOs working on the same issue, say NGOs working specifically in the animal rights space, are coming together, coordinating with each other and attempting to put in better outcomes. And the final stage is collaborative action, which is basically a group of actors working towards a shared goal, which is a long-term goal. So these can be organizations working in diverse spaces, be it health, be it education, be it climate change, and be it animal rights, to come together to work towards a long-term goal of maybe reducing meat consumption. So this, of course, continuously improves practice over time. And it's when we talk about collective impact, even though the idea is very intuitive in nature, it's not a rosy picture completely, because you need time to inculcate the rapport to work collectively and in collaboration with each other. And that, of course, takes time. So even though it's a slow process, and slow and gradual process, it is one which will result in long-term impacts. So way forward, I am just going to give a slight practical demonstration of how this can be seen in the real world. And I will take an example of my own organization that I'm working in, which is called 50 by 40. So the image essentially represents what 50 by 40 is. It's a collective impact organization, and we work with over 60 partner organizations and want to unite as many players working towards food systems transformation. So as Saritha already mentioned in the introduction, 50 by 40 aims towards cutting the global production and consumption of industrialized animal agriculture and products by the year 2040 by 50%. So all the partners that we currently work with are from diverse spaces and are also from different ages. So we have younger organizations, and we also have organizations which have expertise in their own particular domain. Now, why this format of working together in collaboration help? We have so basically a diverse stakeholder network enables conversations to go beyond what our particular domain is. So for example, if we are an NGO which works in the animal rights groups, it is important to ensure that the conversation goes beyond the animal rights groups, and to also include non-animal welfare world to bring a more holistic perspective. So it helps in avoiding sort of creating an echo chamber where we are just talking to people who are already who already know about these issues. It's more important to bring in people who don't know about these issues and work together with them, because of course transforming food systems itself is a complex issue which requires a complex solution. So what our model works like is that we have events where we host and organize and participate and encourage conversations on food systems across diverse stakeholders. Then we have something known as working groups, where we have different organizations working in different domains coming together to work on one thematic area. So it does not mean that health groups are only working with other health organizations, and animal rights groups are only working with other animal rights organizations. We have animal rights and health groups working together in a more collaborative fashion to bring in outcomes which are essential outcomes. So the unique aspect about this is this cross sectoral collaboration, which right now we feel is kind of lacking in the entire system that we work in. So the way ahead, as I see it, is that each organization should have sort of like a long-term roadmap and set milestones as to which are the regions and which are the spaces within their own work where they can encourage more collaboration with diverse stakeholders. And once you have that roadmap ready, how is it that you can practically put it into play? How is it that you can grow the network that you currently operate in to include more stakeholders from essentially the non-animal welfare world to encourage a more holistic standpoint? And yes, so any questions and anything would be appreciated. I will drop my email link in the comment section as well. Over to you, Saritha.
Thank you so much, Pavitra. This is very enlightening and very interesting and kind of eye-opening. And with this, I think we'll go to Harsha. We'll take the questions in the later 15 minutes of the session. So Harsha, over to you.
Thank you, Saritha, for the warm welcome. And I would like to extend my thanks to Asia for Animals to giving me this opportunity. Yes, my screen. Okay, thank you, for doing that. So good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're located. I am Harsha Doria, working as a Senior Campaign Officer for Animals and Farming at World Animal Protection India. So I would like to talk about first, let's talk about a little on what is factory farming. Factory farming is the largest source of animal cruelty in the world. And factory farming or intensive animal farming is the intense and confined farming of animals such as pigs, cows, and chickens, otherwise also known as concentrated animal feeding operations or intensive animal agriculture factory farms. They are basically industrial facilities that raise large numbers of animals, mostly indoors, in conditions intended to maximize production at a minimal cost. But what's the impact of this maximum production with minimum costing? It's animal suffering and much more bigger problems linked with this, which we are going to discuss in the next slide. So these are the overlapping problems of factory farming. The problem doesn't end at the suffering only, and factory farming has its own overlapping problems, starting from zoonotic diseases, habitat destruction, public health devastation, antimicrobial resistance, which is known as AMR in short, to the most evident problem, climate change. Factory farming is leading to destruction of the planet and its living being in many ways. Global food system is the biggest driver of this natural world destruction, and a shift to predominantly plant-based diet is crucial in halting this damage. Even the Chatham House report has stated that intensive agriculture is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss. Do you know animal farming is occupying almost 80% of agriculture land globally? The report has also suggested that current food system indirectly drives biodiversity loss by contributing to climate change. The global food system is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than any other aspect of our lives. And the intensity of animal protein production is a threat to the survival of most biodiverse and critical ecosystems. So let's learn about what is this animal agriculture intensification. Next slide, please. So we all know that chickens or other animals in intense stress and crowding would naturally hinder the process of animal growth and their development, which is going to make them susceptible to diseases and infection. And that is why including regular doses of antibiotics in their feed and water for entire herds and flocks are given. And in addition to this, even drugs are injected at various stages throughout their development. It is a low-cost way to keep this highly stressed, immune-compromised animals alive, and of course a fast growing rate. And that is why the use of antibiotics are being used to prevent these stressed animals from getting sick. They prop up a system of low welfare. Next slide, please. Totally, we know that more than 70 billions are farmed annually. 50 billion of them spend lives on factory farms. They endure short, miserable lives in conditions so horrible, they are often prevented from engaging in natural behaviors, such as dust bathing, raising their babies, and even lying down comfortably. Moreover, most of our consumption, be it meat, dairy, or eggs, they are coming from an immunologically compromised animals confined to cramped, unhygienic condition and transported along distances without proper handling and care. The more we drive food production, the cheaper food becomes, and the more our diets become dominated by a smaller number of species grown intensively at a large scale. So I will first talk about the zoonotic diseases, that what WHO has emitted. When we talk about zoonotic diseases, it has been estimated by WHO that 60% of globally reported emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. And out of these, 72% are originated from wildlife. Importantly, disease emergence in wildlife is largely driven by exposure to domestic animals or human-induced activities. As Pavitra also mentioned about that 75% of new or emerging human infectious diseases reported in past 3 decades are zoonotic. So let's take a look at this incidence to understand the cycle. So as we know that SARS epidemic in 2003 affected over 8,000 people and took lives of more than 700 humans, where civet cats in wildlife market in Guangdong were identified as vector for transmission of virus. Ebola has affected many lives since 2014, which was traced to have a food pet and primates slaughtered for food. And Nipah virus in 1998 killed over half of the infected humans, which was also traced in fruit bats via intensively farmed pigs in Malaysia. Measles, which has taken millions of lives, has also originated from a virus due to domestication of sheep, goats, and transmitted to humans. Again, the butchering and consumption of chimpanzees has led to deadly HIV and taken over lives of 32 million humans till date. And now we have COVID-19, which has actually taken up life of more than 3 million people till now. So moving on to next slide is basically during COVID-19, we have been guided to avoid others, maintain social distancing, and maintain better hygiene. While our food we consume is coming from an immunologically compromised animals, which are confined to cramped, unhygienic condition and in stress. Also, we have been advised to, have reduce our stress while staying at home, while majority of animals farmed for food live in the condition that is highly causing suffering and stress. Treatment of farm animals is the world's biggest animal welfare issue, and it's getting bigger. By 2050, livestock production will be twice what it was in 2000. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at what is the impact on public health is going to have. And if we talk about from a perspective of antibiotics, so the discovery of antibiotics and their immense capabilities to combat and destroy bacteria and treat infection was one of the most significant development in the human history. Even in the presence of high efficacy of medicines, great discoveries, we are threatening the folds of past work done in the health industry and mortally jeopardizes people's health. Or major treatments like surgeries, organ transplants, cancer therapy, metanol surgeries, and are more due to antibiotics. And this will be reversed due to misuse, overuse of antibiotics in the farming industry. Roughly 3/4 of all antibiotics sold each year are marketed for use in farm animals rather than humans. They are routinely used to prop up low welfare practices system on intensive farms. Their overuse contributes to the rapid rise spread of bacteria resistant to medicine used to fight infections, which they are also known as superbugs, and that's why they are carried off from farms by water, air, workers, insects, wildlife, meat, even reaching humans and causing life-threatening illness. Such farms are closely linked to other critical concerns, including the zoonotic diseases that we talked about earlier, outbreaks, water pollution, overuse of antibiotics, and development of a silent pandemic antimicrobial resistance. So let's talk about a little more what is the importance of antibiotics. I have already mentioned a bit, but these three were the categorized things that they treat or control infections. They protect people with weakened immune system and they prevent surgical site infection. But what we have been doing is just using these antibiotics as a band-aid for low welfare intensive farm system. They are routinely given antibiotics or other drugs at the time of weaning or as it is highly stressful period with change in feed, environment, socially, etc. They are susceptible to infections like diarrhea, respiratory diseases, even specifically if we talk about pigs, chicken, and dairy calves as well. When heavily crowded in barren environments, which leads to fighting, biting, competition for feed, or general stress in high density living, antibiotics are again used in feed or water at low levels, which after gut bacteria work as either growth promotion or to prevent illness in a herd. This is next slide is just a case study to tell about that there is ample science showing how antibiotics overuse on factory farms leads to superbugs or AMR known as, which spreads to workers, environment, and into the food chain. There are plenty of examples where this has been proved. In Canada has a good data of Kettifer resistance in chickens after mass use. They are now controlling this. India has banned the use of colistin in livestock, and after researchers showed that AMR is growing in poultry. Even journalists have highlighted that how companies are promoting growth promotant use of colistin in India, despite prohibited use as a growth promoter in the US. Next slide, please. Apart from talking about from a health perspective, AMR is going to be a costly crisis. Pavitra has already touched upon the base that how many people have died already and how many are supposed to die by 2050. There are contributing factors if we talk about that, the ad hoc approach and vastly different levels of policy and enforcement globally. The stakeholders are not interconnected, as Pavitra mentioned that we need collaborative approach. The SARS outbreak in 2003 alone has estimated, the cost of $52 billion, while the others H1N1 pandemic has already given from a 10 US billion dollar in economic damages. Even the economic cost of COVID-19 is projected to be in the trillions, prompting a global recession, if not depression. And who are going to be affected by this, which is LMIC, lower middle class countries are going to be affected by this. So what is the solution if we come back to that? Next slide, please. Food has rightly become a key talking point in conversation around sustainability with animal protein due to livestock industry heavy demand for crops, water, energy and land. Companies and government are even starting to join civil society in acknowledging that we can't have a sustainable future without addressing the current unsustainability of diets around the world. Considering the recent pandemic of COVID-19, people are becoming more health conscious, bringing a change in food habits. They frequently visit gyms, seek advice from nutritionists, even take better care of their health. The changing demands for currently changing food habits are giving a new direction towards sustainable businesses. If people can have healthier life by opting for more plant-based food and less animal-based food, then why don't we make lives of farmed animals better by providing them higher welfare systems? Moving on to the next area, which talks about what is happening to Earth when we talk about wildlife and how Earth is getting disrupted. The Earth has lost its wildlife since 1970, but tripled its livestock population. The picture is clearly in front of your eyes that the global food system is the only biggest driver for this destruction of natural world. And as I mentioned earlier, that the shift to a predominantly plant-based diet is crucial in halting this damage. The current intensive system are hurdle towards a better ecosystem and a rich biodiversity. You know that animal farming has occupied already 80% of agricultural land globally. Even Jane Goodall, the renowned conservationist, we know that said that intensive farming of billions of animals seriously damage the environment and inhuman crowded conditions risk new pandemic diseases crossing the people. So let's talk about little what kind of damage it is causing and talking about the facts when we come to environment damage and climate changes or food production system are causing, we have seen food security issues. Food security is undermined as land diverted to crops to feed animals destined for consumption rather than humans. Over 40% of the world's cereal production is for animal feed. For every 100 calories fed to animals as cereals, just 17 to 30 calories enter the human food chain as meat. Habitat loss is another greatest threat to the world's biodiversity, and agriculture is actually accounting for this land use change globally. Nearly 80% of agricultural land is used for livestock production, including the growth of crops of animal feed. And around one third of that land is used to grow cereals, is used to grow for grain for livestock now. By 2028, an additional area of land almost twice the size of Switzerland may be needed just to grow the soya used to feed animals. So do you see, we are growing food to feed the animals which we want to eat. Why can't we skip one step and save lives by eating cereals directly and save our farmed animals and create more space for our wild animals? So just an example I give that in the next slide is that meat production has created more greenhouse gas emissions than all forms of transportation. From production, processing, and transport of animal feed account for about 45% of agriculture emissions. Without fast and large-scale downward shift in global meat consumption, agriculture will consume the entire world's carbon budget necessary for keeping global temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. So next, I want to give a case study of what we have been doing, and this is our Better Dairy project. Let me explain how we did this successful public mobilization for the betterment of dairies and animals. We used approaches which were engaging, convincing, and action-oriented towards public, including the consumer of dairy products. We used a virtual reality film of school children showcasing the cruelty inside urban and peri-urban dairies. We used smell leaflets to showcase how the dairies smell, which is not just cruel to animals, but unhygienic for the consumers as well. We ran interactive quizzes for the fun facts of cows and buffaloes and make kids understand that how fun-loving, intelligent, and sentient species they are. Moving on to the next slide, giving an example of what we exactly did. We created an ice cream cart, a mock ice cream cart, which included a menu of cruelty to showcase how unimaginable conditions dairy animals live in within the city limits. We took our ice cream cart to the streets to spread awareness about the sufferings of dairy animals. We used menu of cruelty to interact with the public, which we have 5 flavors. It's called Pitch Dark, the Fasting Special, Guy Special, the Mystical, and Dr. Arnav. Every flavor has its own meaning, as you can see on the screen. Through these offline activities and aggressive online campaigning as well, we were able to receive support from 78K people. We also used external platforms like change.org for highlighting the issues of cruelty faced by animals in urban and peri-urban areas. Through that as well, we received more than 1.7 lakh signups on the petitions ongoing. The next is how we did. Can you go to the next slide, please? The government lobbying. Yeah, right. So it was, we had this National Dairy Code of Practices for Management of Dairy Animals in India. It was prepared jointly by scientists of Indian Council of Agriculture Research, National Dairy Research Institute, and of course our organization, World Protection. The code was developed with the support of the National Dairy Research Institute to ensure improved welfare and management of dairy animals in the country. Apart from that, we've developed a business case study for higher dairy welfare. Innovative farmers are involving with loose hygiene systems that provide basic needs to the animals, facilitate improved production, less use of antibiotics, and confidently supplying high quality milk to the market. A business case report aimed to enable key farmers to tell their story of why they chose higher welfare farming and the benefits realized in their own words. These business owners have employed farm systems that meet minimum welfare needs and reap the benefits of their animals, staff, consumers, and businesses. Now, I would like to showcase a small video which has the journey of our this campaign, which we tried to convince public. So, can you please? Thank you so much. Apologies, there was might be an issue at the sound, but that was the overall picture of what we did. Now, I know Pavitra has already mentioned about what is One Health, and what are their interconnections. But I would like to touch base upon on why this One Health is necessary and what leads to zoonotic diseases when it is not covered up. So we know that One Health is an approach that recognizes the health of all, and people are closely connected to the health of animals or shared environments. It is, as Pavitra mentioned, it is not a new concept, and it has just become important in very recent years. We know that human populations are increasing and living in direct contact with domestic as well as wild animals. Close contact with animals and their environment provides more opportunities for diseases to pass between animals and people. The earth has experienced changes in the climate and land use, such as deforestation, intensive farming practices. Disruptions in environmental conditions and habitats can provide new opportunities for diseases to pass to animals. Even the movement of people, animals, and animal products has increased from international travel and trade. As a result, diseases can spread quickly across the borders and around the globe. These changes have led to the spread of existing or known endemic or new or emerging zoonotic diseases. The health of animals, people, planet, and environment is interconnected. This is an integrated approach that we have to recognize and cure its fundamental relationship and ensure that the specialists or stakeholders in multiple sectors work together to tackle these health threats to animals, humans, and environment. Coming to a conclusion of what we have discussed so far, so what you have to do as an organization. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we have to link animal welfare with mainstream issues like zoonotic diseases, public health, climate change, wildlife habitat destruction, and of course, a new silent pandemic, antimicrobial resistance. There could be many depending upon your country. So we have to build alliance with known animal welfare stakeholders or movement to leverage our movement for animals. We can pick locally relevant problem in our country and link with the farm animal suffering. For public mobilization, when it comes, we have to conduct proper insights that what will work as per their public perspective, what their consumer wants to see, and what pressure points will be there in your specific area. So if the health and well-being of animals and people and planet are interdependent, poor animal health and welfare in factory farming negatively affect food safety, our environment, and climate. Ending factory farming will curb the rise of antimicrobial resistance from farm animals and stop superbugs in their tracks. It will bring better animal health, welfare, healthier diets for people, and a climate safe and sustainable food system. We want to develop a sustainable food system by increasing the demand of plant-based food, in turn, reducing the reliance on the farm animals, and make higher welfare production system with more space, fewer antibiotics, and healthier growth with more natural environments. We can transform our food system to be more sustainable and kinder to animals and significantly improve the overall health of the animals and humans. So we must build back better towards one health and sustainable food system. So let's move towards the food revolution by eating less animal protein and more plant-based protein for the animals, people, health, and the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harsha. This was really interesting. And so we have a lot of time. I think we have till 11:30. If you have any questions, we can ask our speakers here. You can write them in the chat box and I'll be able to share. So we already have a question. So the question is, while talking about One Health and collaborative efforts, most of the stakeholders have similar mindset, which is directed towards environment and animal protection. How do we get authorities onboarded? How do you think the NGO sectors can contribute to government policies favoring industries? Do I rephrase and share? So maybe Pavitra, you can answer this, and Harsha, then you can also add.
Sure. Thank you, Sarita. So I think, of course, it is a huge issue when it comes to investment that goes from government and big corporations into industrial livestock agriculture. And it is something that even we as an organization have been fighting against for long. So one thing that working collectively does is that it helps in amplifying voices from the ground. So as I already spoke about working groups that we have ongoing, one working group that we had running was climate change working group, and out of that came out the divestment working group. So that included a lot of organizations which are working with smallholder farmers, which have been working with, on the ground in terms of land grabbing rights and for indigenous people. And a lot of times these are the people who are highly impacted when it comes to big corporations, land grabbing and turning their spaces into big industrial farms. So one such example was against Pronaka, which was invested, which had received huge investments from the government to open a big industrial farm in Brazil. So the collective impact did raise, at least like start a conversation around divestment from such big industrial farms. And of course, so how that campaign worked was that there was an open letter which went out to the heads of each of the countries working with the World Bank, because it was a World Bank funded project. So each of these countries, with the collective push, many of the heads of the countries agreed on signing on to the open letter, which went ahead to the World Bank to sort of encourage divestment from the project. So even though unfortunately, there is no silver bullet when it comes to divestment campaigns, because it's a huge issue in terms of the funding which is received by industrial agriculture agricultural campaigns, and given the number of NGOs that we currently have running compared to the number of industries which are putting in money, the movement is still very small. So that is what makes working collectively more important and urgent in such a scenario. So even though if the first step is just to raise the voice and amplify voices from the ground, collective impact is very necessary in that space.
Thank you, Pavitra. Harsh, I would pose the same question to you. Do you think there are any strategies that are more effective towards bringing government to not have these supportive policies or not have these investments in animal farming sector? How can we get government to be onboarded with the One Health?
Right. I think first, which Pavitra has mentioned, raising and amplifying the issue is very much necessary, whether it is through collaboration of NGOs or collaboration of different organizations. What I will say, government will be convinced if we showcase that it is for overall health. And it is not just for a one sector, which we as an animal organization is talking about. We have to showcase that this is interlinked with people health, this is linked with environment health, and this is going to feed into more as as I talked about the silent pandemic which is growing. So those values, if we showcase that this is going to impact overall health of the planet and as well as overall economy of the country. So that is going to take up the issue. I won't say that it will take up the issue to a very next level, but that will be a start to make them aware that this is growing and it will keep on growing if you don't keep a hold on that. And when it comes to government, we have to, of course, give them the direct benefits of it that we know, we have seen it. So we have to give them case studies that what can be done when we do not invest in such products, and what is the impact on the land, and what are the other resources which we keep into the land resources. Suppose we are environment is getting problematic, there is a water pollution happening, and so much resources will be taken up from that end as well. So the case studies, more technical knowledge and raw data is required to pull into it. So yes, it requires a lot of background work to convince the government in that sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a question, my question also. So it's a follow-up to what you both have said. So it sounds like One Health is like a long-term collaborative effort, right? And in any long-term effort where a lot of stakeholders are involved, monitoring and evaluation is something that's very challenging. So do you think there are such strategies that are very effective for monitoring and evaluation purposes for these projects that we would take with One Health approach in terms of doing collaborative work? Various organizations in various different sectors come to it. So maybe Pavitra, you can, or Harsha, yes, you can share.
Yes, I think it's more about, dedicated roles and response given throughout the plan that we make. That could be the only purpose to start with perfect monitoring and evaluation. Because what happens when it works to collaborative work, the monitoring is lost and the evaluation of the project is sometimes missing. And that is why when we work collaborative, there is a designated roles and responsibilities for the different sectors, whatever plan project it is. And that will help us to monitor and evaluate what has happened. Like, is there any benefit out of this collaboration or not? And it should not be, it's like that only the one component of the collaborative committee is working. That will not be an effective collaborative approach.
Thank you. Pavitra, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I completely echo with Harsha's point. I think the main idea is to, even before the collaboration begins, to sort of create a framework of what the roles and responsibilities will be of each of the collaborating parties. This is, it's as intuitive as how we used to do school projects or college projects, that a lot of times evaluation of the project in the end is somewhat missing. So it's very important to create a roadmap with very dedicated milestones and very dedicated roles and responsibilities of each of the parties. Of course, collaboration in such a complex world requires trust and requires that relationship building between each of the organizations working together. So I think providing that necessary rapport building time, as well as keeping the trust in that the other party will do their own share of work, is very, very essential. And yeah, I think it's mostly a game of trust building and a game of ensuring that everybody does their role. And of course, having dedicated, clearly cut milestones for the projects that you're collaborating for.
Thank you. There's another question. In a 2016 report of Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations, it was highlighted that livestock farming is being intensified in all countries. And Harsha, you also mentioned that by 2050, livestock production will go twice of what it is today. Is welfare even possible with all the limiting factors of the cost involved and resources required and other such aspects in that sense? So does One Health approach have anything to provide for animal rights and this welfare divide? Where are we looking at? Is welfare really the answer?
I think I would say that it should be a dual approach. If you are doing one side welfare, then you have to work towards the plant-based diet promotion. So we have to move towards a complete plant-based diet. But in looking at the scenario, how we will do that, a portion of it will be high welfare, and the portion of, so basically we are making people who are consuming animal protein, they should start or reduce their consumption. So it is basically reducing that pressure on all the resources which intensive agriculture is keeping upon. So that intensive agriculture has to be phased out completely, and then we start moving towards a goal of having the plant-based diets and convincing people why it is necessary for them and for the planet. So one direction will not be the answer to your question, Sarita. We have to take dual approach to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Pavitra, would you like to add anything?
I think she is very properly put in the point that, of course, complex issues require complex solutions, and it cannot be a one-sided approach. It cannot be either or like either animal welfare or animal rights, or I mean, it is a long-term goal, and it requires efforts from all sides and from all approaches. So yeah, I think I'll second what Harsha said.
Thank you. So okay, there's another question for Pavitra. How do you see petitions working in favor of animal rights? Do they really make a difference?
Do petitions for animal rights really make a difference? I think in today's world, petitions are the go-to campaign actions for most organizations. And I do think at a policy level, as I already mentioned, the first step is to amplify voices. And that is one of the main action items that you can do, that is raise petitions and raise more signatories for your petitions whenever it comes to animal rights. And I do think it is effective. I don't have any examples as of now to give to that, but I have seen, as I provided an example for divestment campaign, the petition did work in amplifying voices. And we right now have a Just Livestock Transition campaign ongoing, which again is a petition where more than more than 50 signatories, partner organizations have signed on to the petition to sort of transform animal-based farms into plant-based farms. So they do work, and even if they don't work, it's not going to take away from anything that's ongoing. So I think that is an effective first step.
Thank you. There's one more question. In a country like India, where most livestock farmers are small landowners, how can One Health approach help in creating livelihood shift for livestock farmers to a plant-based agriculture? So, Harsha, you can take the question.
Sure. I think in a country like India, it is going to be a complex system, where most of the farmings are held by smallholders. Not there is no factory farming or industrial farming, if we directly say it in India. And for that, we have to take definitely the dual approach. We have to tell them maybe start with a very less amount of the plant-based, production. Soy production, if they are starting off with any other plant-based component they want to start, and then continue doing that with a high welfare system. That's what we have to start it, and we have to showcase them that people, the consumers, their food is the demand is changing now because of COVID-19 impact, or people are getting more health conscious. They have to understand that demand is more towards the plant-based, and their consumers are asking it. Then only smallholders will be able to understand. And of course, since their livelihood is connected, we have to move gradually in this direction to make them understand that we are not against them. We are with them, but moving gradually into the sector of bigger plant-based production gradually. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think somebody's posted a link here also with that. Just Livestock Transition is a 50 by 40 project, right? That we can all look at to answer this question more. Is there any more questions that the audience would like to pose, or if you have any comments or anything? Or if not, so okay, I can ask one more question of my own. So when it comes to funding or grants for working in farm animal spaces for their rights and their welfare, so are there such grants? Are there such grants that people can look for that are supporting this collaborative effort, this kind of work? Pavitra, maybe you can share first.
I think funding is the elephant in any room. Collective impact organizations and even like collaborative approaches are very new in this space, so to say, and a lot of funding organizations and donor organizations don't really understand the impact that it can create, more so because we are so used to providing funding and receiving fundings for short-term projects which have an immediate impact, and collective impact and collaborative projects are more suited to long-term long-term goals, which creates sort of like a divide between donor organizations and organizations receiving the funding. So one attempt that we have under our, I can give 50 by 40's example, is that I won't lie, it's really difficult to receive funding even as an organization for when it comes to collective impact. We have a platform called We Changers, where our working groups together work on projects and proposals, and these are put up on the platform, and these are matched to organizations which are already there to sort of fund the projects. So that is one sort of a step that we have taken to bring in more collaborative approaches and bring in more funding for such collaborative approaches. Yeah, and apart from that, I think it's an ongoing question. Everybody is struggling to get in more money when it comes to like money from individual impact projects to a more collective impact project. So yeah.
Thank you so much. With that, we have reached 11:30 in India time. Wherever you are, I think it's towards the end of the session. Thank you so much for being such wonderful speakers and answering all those questions. And somebody's also posted in the chat that World Animal Protection has an investing in other programs for local NGOs. Thank you so much. And with this, over to you, Than. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarita and Hassan, Pavitra, for your presentation, and especially Sarita for moderating this session. Yeah, we hope that this event will be organized annually, and we will hope that you support us as well in the coming event and share experience with our other NGOs, other staff members, and make this movement stronger and stronger. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.